Marsha P. Johnson, born August 24, 1945, July 3, 1992, was an American gay liberation activist and self-identified drag queen. Known as an outspoken advocate for gay rights, she was one of the prominent figures in the Stonewall Uprising of 1969. Johnson was a member of the Gay Liberation Front, or the GLF, and co-founded the radical activist group Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR for short, alongside close friend Sylvia Rivera. Popular in New York's gay community, she was also active in the city's art scene, modeling for Andy Warhol and appearing onstage with the drag performance troupe Hot Peaches. Johnson was known as the mayor of Christopher Street for being a welcoming presence in the streets of Greenwich Village. Beginning in 1987, she was an AIDS activist with ACT UP. Johnson's body was found floating in the Hudson River in 1992. While initially ruled a suicide by the New York City Police Department, NYPD, controversy and protest followed the case, resulting in it eventually being reopened as a possible homicide. Marsha P. Johnson was born Malcolm Michaels Jr. on August 24, 1945 in Elizabeth, New Jersey, to father Malcolm Michaels Sr., an assembly line worker at General Motors, and mother Alberta née Claiborne Michaels, a housekeeper. She was raised alongside 6 siblings, and the family attended Mount Teman African Methodist Episcopal Church. Commenting on this upbringing, Johnson said, "I got married to Jesus Christ when I was 16 years old, still in high school." Johnson first began wearing dresses at the age of 5, but stopped temporarily due to harassment by boys who lived nearby. In a 1992 interview, she described being the young victim of rape by a 13-year-old boy. After this, she described the idea of being gay as some sort of dream, rather than something that seemed possible, and so chose to remain sexually inactive until leaving for New York City at age 17. Johnson's mother reportedly said that being homosexual was like being lower than a dog, but Johnson said that Michaels was unaware of the gay community. Johnson's mother also encouraged her to find a homosexual billionaire boyfriend or husband to take care of Johnson for life, a goal Johnson often talked about. Johnson attended Edison High School, now the Thomas A. Edison Career and Technical Academy, in Elizabeth, before dropping out in her senior year. In December 1962, Johnson entered the United States Navy under her birth name and stayed for 6 months, where she eventually earned a GED and was thereafter honorably discharged in June 1963. After her discharge, Johnson left home for New York City with $15 and a bag of clothes, settling at Greenwich Village, where she waited tables. After she began spending time with the street hustlers near the Howard Johnson's restaurant at 6th Avenue and 8th Street, Johnson's life changed. Johnson came out and said, "My life has been built around sex and gay liberation, being a drag queen." Performance work and identity, Johnson initially used the moniker Black Marsha, but later decided on the drag queen name, Marsha P. Johnson, getting Johnson from the Howard Johnson's restaurant on 42nd Street, sarcastically stating that the P stood for Pay It No Mind. Though in a 1979 interview, she revealed it initially stood for Piola. Johnson said the phrase once to a judge who was amused by it, leading to Johnson's release. Johnson preferred female pronouns for herself. The term transgender was not in widespread use during Johnson's lifetime, and she described herself as gay, a transvestite, and a queen, referring to drag queen or street queen. According to Susan Stryker, a professor of human gender and sexuality studies at the University of Arizona, Johnson's gender expression could be called gender nonconforming, In 1970, Marsha gave an interview to radio station WBI, where Johnson stated she was undergoing feminizing hormone therapy with the goal of getting gender surgery. In an interview with Alan Young, in Out of the Closets, Voices of Gay Liberation, Johnson discussed being a member of the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR. Speaking on identity, a drag queen is one that usually goes to a ball, and that's the only time she gets dressed up. Transvestites live in drag. A transsexual spends most of her life in drag. I never come out of drag to go anywhere. Everywhere I go, I get all dressed up. A transvestite is still like a boy, very manly looking, a feminine boy. You wear drag here and there. When you're a transsexual, you have hormone treatments and you're on your way to a sex change, and you never come out of female clothes. Also discussed are Johnson's experiences of the dangers of working as a street prostitute in drag and the death of Johnson's partner. Johnson and Rivera's interviews and writings in this era also at times used terminology in ways that were sarcastic and camp, other times serious, or all of the above at once. Johnson's style of drag was not serious, high drag, or show drag, due to being unable to afford to purchase clothing from expensive stores. She received leftover flowers after sleeping under tables used for sorting flowers in Manhattan's flower district, and was known for wearing crowns of fresh flowers. Johnson was tall, slender, and often dressed in flowing robes and shiny dresses, red plastic high heels and bright wigs, which tended to draw attention. As Edmund White wrote in his 1979 Village Voice article, The Politics of Drag, Johnson also liked dressing in ways that would display the interstice between masculine and feminine. A feature photo of Johnson in this article shows Johnson in a flowing wig and makeup, and a translucent shirt, pants and parka, highlighting the ways that, quoting Kate Millett's Sexual Politics, Johnson is both masculine and feminine at once, or male, but feminine. There is some existing footage of Johnson doing full, glamorous, high drag on stage, but most of her performance work was with groups that were more grassroots, comedic, and political. Johnson sang and performed as a member of J. Kamish's New York-based international drag performance troupe, Hot Peaches, from 1972 through to shows in the 1990s. When the Coquettes, a similar drag troupe from San Francisco, formed an East Coast troupe, the Angels of Light, Johnson was also asked to perform with them. In 1973, Johnson performed the role of the Gypsy Queen in the Angels production, The Enchanted Miracle, about the comet Kohutek. In 1974, Johnson was photographed by pop artist Andy Warhol as part of his Ladies and Gentlemen series. In 1990, Johnson performed with Hot Peaches in London. Johnson, who was also HIV positive, became an AIDS activist and appeared in Hot Peaches' production The Heat in 1990, singing the song Love while wearing an ACT UP, Silence Equals Death button. While the photos of Johnson in dramatic, femme ensembles are the most well-known, there are also photos and film footage of Johnson dressed down in more daily wear of jeans and a flannel shirt and cap, or in shorts and a tank top, and no wig, such as at the Christopher Street Liberation March in 1979, or singing with the New York City Gay Men's Chorus at an AIDS memorial in the 1980s, or marching in a protest in Greenwich Village in 1992. Marsha was generally considered generous and warm-hearted and saintly by those who knew her. Robert Hyde said she had a schizophrenic personality and would become a very nasty, vicious man, looking for fights. A 1979 Village Voice article reported that Johnson's saintly personality was volatile, and listed a roster of gay bars from which she had been banned: Stonewall, Riots. Stonewall Inn, 2016. Johnson had claimed to be one of the first drag queens to go to the Stonewall Inn, though Johnson often contradicted herself on when she was allowed in. The Stonewall Inn was a bar only for wealthy gay men, according to lesbian feminist activist Martha Shelley. The bar was 98% male. On the early morning hours of June 28, 1969, the Stonewall riots occurred. While the first 2 nights of rioting were the most intense, the clashes with police would result in a series of spontaneous demonstrations and marches through the gay neighborhoods of Greenwich Village for roughly a week afterwards. Johnson was cited along with Zazu Nova and Jackie Hormona by a number of the Stonewall veterans interviewed by David Carter in his book, Stonewall: The Riots That Sparked the Gay Revolution, as being 3 individuals known to have been in the vanguard of the pushback against the police at the uprising. However, Johnson denied starting the uprising. In 1987, she recalled arriving at around 2 o'clock that morning, that the riots had already started by that time, and that the Stonewall building had already been set on fire by police. The riots reportedly started at around 1:20 a.m. after Stormé DeLarverie fought back against a police officer who attempted to arrest her that night. According to Carter, Robin Souser reported that fellow Stonewall veterans such as Morty Manford and Marty Robinson had witnessed Johnson throw a shot glass at a mirror in the torched bar, screaming, "I got my civil rights." Sousa told the Gay Activists Alliance shortly afterwards that it was the shot glass that was heard around the world. Carter, however, concluded that Robinson had given several different accounts of the uprising, and in none of the accounts was Johnson's name brought up, possibly in fear that if he publicly credited the uprising to Johnson, then her well-known mental state and gender non-conforming could have been used effectively by the movement's opponents. The alleged shot glass incident has also been heavily disputed. Prior to Carter's book, it was claimed Johnson had thrown a brick at a police officer, an account that was never verified by any of the rioters that were there that night. Johnson also confirmed not being present at the Stonewall Inn when the rioting broke out, but instead had heard about it and went to get Rivera, who was at a park uptown sleeping on a bench, to inform her about it. However, many have corroborated that on the second night, Johnson climbed up a lamppost and dropped a heavy bag onto a police car, shattering the windshield. Other activism. Marsha P. Johnson, Joseph Ratansky, and Sylvia Rivera, in 1973, by Gary Legault, on the first anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising. On June 28, 1970, Johnson marched in the first Gay Pride rally, then called the Christopher Street Liberation Day. Johnson joined the Gay Liberation Front, GLF, in September 1970, and was active in the GLF Drag Queen Caucus. One of her most notable direct actions occurred in the same month. She joined the GLF, joining a sit-in protest at Weinstein Hall at New York University alongside fellow GLF members after administrators canceled a dance when they found out that it was sponsored by gay organizations. Shortly after, Johnson and Rivera co-founded the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, initially titled Street Transvestites Actual Revolutionaries, or STAR. The two of them became a visible presence at gay liberation marches and other radical political actions. In 1973, Johnson and Rivera were banned from participating in the Gay Pride Parade by the Gay and Lesbian Committee who were administering the event, stating they weren't going to allow drag queens at their marches, claiming they were giving them a bad name. Their response was to march defiantly ahead of the parade. During a gay rights rally at New York City Hall in the early 70s, photographed by Deanna Davies, a reporter asked Johnson why the group was demonstrating, Johnson shouted into the microphone, "Darling, I want my gay rights now." During another incident around this time, Johnson was confronted by police officers for hustling in New York. When the officers attempted to perform an arrest, Johnson hit them with a handbag which contained 2 bricks. When asked by the judge for an explanation for hustling, Johnson claimed to be trying to secure enough money for a tombstone for her husband. During a time when same-sex marriage was illegal in the United States, the judge asked what happened to this alleged husband. Johnson responded, "Pig shot him." Initially sentenced to 90 days in prison for the assault, Johnson's lawyer eventually convinced the judge that Bellevue Hospital would be more suitable. Star House in November 1970, Johnson and Rivera established Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, Star House, an organization and shelter for homeless gay and trans youth, and paid the rent for it with money they made themselves as sex workers. While the house was not focused on performance, Johnson was a drag mother of Star House, in the long-standing tradition of houses as chosen family in the Black and Latino LGBT community. Johnson worked to provide food, clothing, emotional support, and a sense of family for the young drag queens, trans women, gender nonconformists, and other gay street kids living on the Christopher Street docks or in Johnson's house on the Lower East Side. While the original location of Star House was evicted in 1971, and the building was destroyed, though it was claimed that the household existed in different configurations and at different locations over the years, Johnson herself said after the 1971 eviction, "The group dispersed and broke completely apart either due to drug overdoses or members leaving, including Rivera, who moved back up north to Tarrytown following the infamous 1973 Gay Liberation March." Later life: by the time Johnson settled at NYC in 1963, she lived on the streets and engaged in survival sex. Johnson recalled getting confronted by her customers, who would think she was a woman until Johnson removed her clothing, in which by then they would threaten to beat up or shoot Johnson despite Johnson assuring them she wasn't a woman at all. In connection with sex work, she claimed to have been arrested over 100 times and was also shot once in the late 1970s. Johnson spoke of first having a mental breakdown in 1970. By 1979, Johnson claimed she had had about 8 of them. According to Bob Kohler, Johnson would walk naked up Christopher Street and be taken away for 2 or 3 months to be treated with chlorpromazine, an antipsychotic medication. Upon returning, the medication would wear off over the course of 1 month, and Johnson would then return to normal. Between 1980 and Johnson's death in 1992, she lived with a friend, Randy Wicker, who had invited Johnson to stay the night one time when it was very cold out, about 10 degrees Fahrenheit, -12 degrees C, and Johnson had just never left. When Wicker's lover, David, became terminally ill with AIDS, Johnson became his caregiver. After visiting David and other friends with the virus in the hospital during the AIDS pandemic, Johnson, who was diagnosed with AIDS around 1990, became committed to sitting with the sick and dying, as well as doing street activism with AIDS activist groups, including ACT UP. In David France's documentary, The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson, Johnson is seen participating in a 1980s memorial service and action for those who had died of AIDS, along with members of the gay men's health crisis. In 1992, New York became gripped by a gay-bashing epidemic with 1,300 reports, 18% of which was allegedly perpetrated by police. Marches were organized in response, and Johnson was one of the activists who marched in the streets, demanding justice. Only weeks later, Johnson would also be found dead, having sustained a severe head injury. Christopher Park in 2013, now part of the Stonewall National Monument, stands across the street from the Stonewall Inn. George Segal's gay liberation statues now stand where Johnson and the other street queens and homeless gay youth spent time in decades past. In 1992, George Segal's sculpture, Gay Liberation, was moved to Christopher Park as part of the new Gay Liberation Monument. Johnson commented, "How many people have died for these two little statues to be put in the park to recognize gay people? How many years does it take for people to see that we're all brothers and sisters and human beings in the human race? I mean, how many years does it take for people to see that we're all in this rat race together?" Johnson remained devoutly religious in later life, often lighting candles and praying at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Hoboken, which was renamed Our Lady of Grace in 2008. In 1992, Johnson said, "I practice the Catholic religion because the Catholic religion is part of the Santeria of the Saints, which says that we are all brothers and sisters in Christ." Johnson would also make offerings to the saints and spirits in a more personal manner, keeping a private altar at home when possible. As friend James Gallagher related in the documentary Pay It No Mind, Marsha would always say she went to the Greek church, she went to the Catholic church, she went to the Baptist church, she went to the Jewish temple. She said she was covering all angles. In the summer of 1991, Johnson participated in the Interfaith AIDS Memorial Service at the Church of St. Veronica in Greenwich Village. When asked about religion in the last interview, Johnson said, "I use Jesus Christ the most in my prayers, most of the time." A neighbor also said Johnson would pray, prostrate on the floor in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary, in the church across from Wicker's apartment, where Johnson lived in later years. Johnson's friend Sasha McCaffrey added, "I would find her in the strangest churches. She'd be wearing velvet and throwing glitter." Johnson expressed a relationship with the divine that was direct and personal, saying in her last interview, June 1992, about leaving home in 1963, "I got the Lord on my side, and I took him to my heart with me, and I came to the city, for better or worse. And he said, you might wind up with nothing, 'cause, me and Jesus is always talking. And I said, honey, I don't care if I never have nothing ever till the day I die. All I want is my freedom. I believe Jesus is the only man I can truly trust. He's like the spirit that follows me around, and helps me out in my hour of need." In Pay It No Mind, friends Bob Kohler and Augusto Machado talk about Johnson's relationship with Neptune. Kohler tells a story of sunbathing at the Christopher Street Piers when Johnson, naked, began grabbing at Kohler's shirt, shouting, "My father needs those clothes." Johnson succeeded in pulling Kohler's shirt off and throwing it into the Hudson River. These were sacrifices to her father and to Neptune, who got all mixed up together, explains Kohler. Machado continues, "She was making offerings of flowers and change to King Neptune, as an appeasement to help her friends who are on the other side." Near the time of Johnson's death in 1992, Wicker said Johnson was increasingly sick and in a fragile state. However, none of Johnson's friends or relatives believed Johnson was suicidal. Death shortly after the 1992 Gay Pride Parade. Johnson's body was discovered floating in the Hudson River. Police initially ruled the death a suicide, but Johnson's friends and other members of the local community insisted she was not suicidal and noted that the back of her head had a massive wound. Johnson's death occurred during a time when anti-gay violence was at a peak in New York City, including bias crime by police. Johnson was one of the activists who had been drawing attention to the issue, participating in marches and other activism to demand justice for victims, and an inquiry into how to stop the violence. She had been speaking out against the dirty cops and elements of organized crime that many believed responsible for some of these assaults and murders, and had even voiced the concern that some of what Wicker was stirring up and pulling Johnson into could get you murdered. This added to the suspicions of foul play and possible murder. Johnson's body was cremated, and following a funeral at a local church and a march down 7th Avenue, friends released her ashes over the Hudson River off the Christopher Street piers. Police allowed 7th Avenue to be closed while Johnson's ashes were carried to the river. After the funeral, a series of demonstrations and marches to the police precinct took place to demand justice for Johnson. Post-mortem developments. According to Rivera, Kohler believed Johnson committed suicide due to an ever-increasing fragile state, which Rivera herself disputed, claiming she and Johnson had made a pact to cross the River Jordan together. Those who were close to Johnson considered the death suspicious. Many claimed that while Johnson did struggle mentally, this did not manifest itself as suicidal ideation. Wicker later said that Johnson may have hallucinated and walked into the river, or may have jumped into the river to escape harassers, but stated that Johnson was never suicidal. Several people came forward to say they had seen Johnson harassed by a group of thugs who had also robbed people. According to Wicker, a witness saw a neighborhood resident fighting with Johnson on July 4. During the fight, he called Johnson a homophobic slur and later bragged to someone at a bar that he had killed a drag queen named Marsha. The witness said that when he tried to tell police what he had seen, his story was ignored. Other locals stated later that law enforcement was not interested in investigating Johnson's death, stating that the case was about a gay black man and wanting little to do with it at the time. In December 2002, a police investigation resulted in reclassification of Johnson's cause of death from suicide to undetermined. Former New York politician Thomas Duane fought to reopen the case because, usually when there is a death by suicide, the person usually leaves a note. She didn't leave a note. In November 2012, activist Maria Lopez succeeded in getting the police to reopen the case as a possible homicide. In 2016, Victoria Cruz of the Anti-Violence Project also tried to get Johnson's case reopened and succeeded in gaining access to previously unreleased documents and witness statements. She sought out new interviews with witnesses, friends, other activists, and police who had worked the case or had been on the force at the time of Johnson's death. Some of her work to find justice for Johnson was filmed by David France for the 2017 documentary The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson. Tributes. Mural of Marsha P. Johnson, 2020, Astoria, Queens. New York. Commemorative plaque in the Plaza de la Diversidad de la Ciudad de Murcia, Spain. The 2012 documentary Pay It No Mind the Life and Times of Marsha P. Johnson heavily features segments from a 1992 interview with Johnson, which was filmed shortly before Johnson's death. Many friends of Johnson's from Greenwich Village are interviewed for the documentary. Johnson appears as a character in 2 fictional film dramas that are based on real events, including Stonewall 2015, played by Atoja Abbott, and Happy Birthday, Marsha 2016, played by Mya Taylor. Both movies are creative interpretations, inspired by the Stonewall Uprising. The 2017 documentary, The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson, follows trans woman Victoria Cruz of the Anti-Violence Project as she investigates Johnson's death. Like Pay It No Mind, it relies on archival footage and interviews. New York City artist Anony produced multiple tributes to Johnson, including Baroque pop band Anony and the Johnsons, named in Johnson's honor, and the 1995 play The Ascension of Marsha P. Johnson. Their 2023 album My Back was A Bridge for You to Cross, depicts Johnson on the album's artwork. American drag queen and TV personality RuPaul has called Johnson an inspiration, describing Johnson as the true drag mother. During an episode of his show RuPaul's Drag Race in 2012, RuPaul told her contestants that Johnson paved the way for all of them. In 2018, the New York Times published a belated obituary for Johnson. A large, painted mural depicting Johnson and Sylvia Rivera went on display in Dallas, Texas, in 2019 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. The painting of the two pioneers of the gay rights movement in front of a transgender flag claims to be the world's largest mural honoring the trans community. On May 30, 2019, it was announced that Johnson and Sylvia Rivera would be honored with monuments at Greenwich Village, near the site of the Stonewall Club. Construction is rumored to be completed by 2021. These monuments of Johnson and Rivera will be the world's first to honor transgender activists. A Love Letter to Marsha by Jesse Pallotta was completed in 2021. On May 31, 2019, queer street artists Homo Riot and Suriani created a mural as part of the World Pride Mural Project and Stonewall 50 World Pride NYC 2019, and dedicated to queer liberation, featuring multiple images of Johnson. The mural, located at 2nd Avenue and Houston Street in New York City, was curated by photographer and filmmaker Daniel "Dusty" Albanese. In June 2019, Johnson was one of the inaugural 50 American pioneers, trailblazers, and heroes. Inducted on the National LGBTQ Wall of Honor within the Stonewall National Monument in New York City's Stonewall Inn. The SNM is the first U.S. national monument dedicated to LGBTQ rights and history, and the wall's unveiling was timed to take place during the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. On June 30, 2020, Google celebrated Marsha P. Johnson with a Google Doodle. In August 2020, the Union County, New Jersey Office of LGBTQ Affairs announced Johnson's hometown, Elizabeth, New Jersey, would erect a monument to Johnson near City Hall. A petition to remove the Christopher Columbus Monument in the Italian neighborhood of the city and replace it with a statue of Johnson received over 75,000 signatures and spurred the county to choose another site. The mural of Johnson in Elizabeth was vandalized during Pride Month in June 2021. Community organizers vowed to fund restoration of the mural to honor Pride Month and Johnson's legacy. On August 24, 2020, the 75th anniversary of Johnson's birth, the Marsha P. Johnson State Park was renamed in Johnson's honor, becoming the first New York state park named after an openly gay person. 2 years later, Governor Kathy Hochul announced that a new gate to the park would be constructed in Johnson's honor.